Hi everyone.
Hello. Ray Franz, page 677 of the chapter A Congregation of Free People. He's been using Marcus Dods and Robert Banks and now Emma Brunner, all clergymen by the way, to make his point that there is light out there, and it's better light and better life if you do church small rather than large. So he's got Brunner, Banks and Dodds stressing the simplicity, and they do. But being that they're all clergymen for different denominations, they all also believe in normal church, the public worship of Jesus Christ and God. So here he's got the next subhead, getting together to encourage to love and good deeds. And that has to do with the most often quoted text that you hear at the Kingdom Hall about missing meetings. And Ray develops his thought this way: these facts help us appreciate the sense and force of this often quoted exhortation. And this version of it is from the NIV. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. And Ray's comment is, Christian freedom offers no excuse for showing apathy toward others, simply living for oneself. Love draws people together. As members of Christ's body, individually, we are members one of another. That's from Romans chapter 12, verse 5. Does then this stress on meeting together, stated in the quoted text, limit our Christian freedom, inhibit our expression of it, or, once again, make us subject to law, to rules? To the contrary, it gives our freedom greater meaning, greater value.
There is nothing connected with the rigidity or formality of works of law in our interesting ourselves in others, showing brotherly affection for them and for their spiritual growth, by our seeking to be with them in brotherly gathering. Neither in the exhortation at Hebrews 10, verses 24 and 25, nor in any other part of Scripture do we have any declared set of rules governing such gathering together by fellow believers. While this text is used by some as a sort of spiritual club to enforce strict attendance at meetings routinely held at specific times, this calls for reading more into the exhortation than is there. The Greek word in this text rendered give up, neglect, or similar renderings infer desertion or abandonment, something far more serious than a mere irregularity or occasional infrequency of attendance. Nor is there anything to show that being in attendance at such gatherings was ever presented by Jesus' apostles as having greater merit as worship over other expressions of love and faith made in Christians' daily life. We do not find this idea expressed in any of the apostolic writings. As a source earlier referred to expresses it, Christians learned or were encouraged to learn that, and here he quotes Robert Banks again, quote, worship involves the whole of one's life, every word and action, and knows no special place or time. Since all places and times have now become the venue for worship, Paul cannot speak of Christians assembling in church, ecclesia, distinctively for this purpose. They are already worshiping God, acceptably or unacceptably, in whatever they are doing. End of quote.
And he has a footnote, and this is what he says. The Expositor's Greek Testament, Volume 4, in discussing Hebrews 10:25, and here again we're referencing Marcus Dods, who we did reference a few pages back, comments on the writer's use of the rather lengthy phrase episynagoge, euton, gathering together of selves, literally, instead of the simple synagogue, assembly or congregation, saying that synagogue might rather have suggested the building and formal stated meetings, while episynagoge, euton, denotes merely the meeting together of Christians. So Marcus Dods makes a distinction between these two Greek words quite rightly, because this first word, episynagoge, is fairly rare compared to synagogue, even in the New Testament. Synagogue is used very frequently. So what does the writer of Hebrews mean by this episynagoge? And Dodds obviously thinks it means the distinctive Christian meetings.
Right, so the difference between the Jewish assembly and the Christian assembly.
So we might think if we, and I do find it, evangelicals tend to do this too, the same thing with the witnesses do, i.e. he means don't miss your meetings. But no, they're going to meetings, and they're still going to meetings, but they're forsaking the uniquely Christian meeting.
One, yeah.
The episynagoge.
So that was new for me, the idea, first of all, the idea that they were still going to synagogue once the early church started. You know, because you have this view that somehow everything switched over to Christian life for these people, and they just quit cold turkey. No more Jewish.
Yeah. The true religion succeeded the old true religion.
Yeah.
But no, the evidence of the book of Acts is very plainly that they went to their usual Jewish assembly, and they added on this an
additional meeting. So the Sunday, the gathering of the Christians.
Yeah. So the actual literal word, episynagoge, means upon the synagogue, i.e. this is an add-on. B.F. Westcott, for 3 generations at least, B.F. Westcott's commentary on Hebrews was the commentary on the Greek text of Hebrews. And by the way, those 3 generations, interestingly, were Russell's, Rutherford's, and Fred Franz's. So this information was there all those generations. So Westcott actually talks about this distinction between the 2 types of meetings, the exclusively Jewish and the Jewish Christian. And here's what Westcott has to say about this very passage, Hebrews 10:25. He says, the fulfillment of this social duty is presented under a twofold aspect, negatively and positively. Christians are not to abandon the opportunities of meeting, and they are to use the power of mutual influence. The word, and he uses the word here for the forsaking, this word that Ray rightly says has more the force of desertion or abandonment in not forsaking the gathering. He says this word conveys the notion not simply of leaving as no longer taking part in the assembly, but of abandoning, leaving the assembly exposed to peril and conflict. And then he talks about the Greek word episynagoge, which expresses the assembly formed and not only the act of assembling. So it's a formed assembly. And for me, that kind of offsets the idea that it's just a casual meeting of Christians.
Whenever they feel like it.
Yeah,
they did have a routine of meeting on a regular basis, yeah.
And then he makes the point that this is meaning the characteristically Christian meetings as opposed to the Jewish. But then he says this about the consequences of missing these meetings or abandoning this peculiarly Christian assembly. He says, such conduct on the side of Christians would arise partly from fear, lest they should provoke the active hostility of the Jewish authorities, partly from self-confidence, on the other hand, as though they no longer needed the assistance of ordinary common worship. And I think that's what we're in danger of here. We don't need assembling in a formal sense. And if we're going to sacrifice any, we sacrifice the uniquely Christian. And then Westcott goes on, where the general, that is the common worship, where the general average of spiritual life might be counted too low to aid more mature believers. In other words, we're not motivated to go because we know that stuff. And yeah, the danger of over-familiarity, thinking that you know. But you're not there, as the text says, to learn. You're there to provoke to love and to good works. And then he says, yet more than this, the Christian assemblies must have appeared insignificant when compared with those to which the Hebrews were accustomed. Now Ray has made that point earlier in the book, that yes, the simplicity of Christian worship would be almost embarrassing or inadequate when you're used to the fabulous in impressive forms of temple worship, and even in big cities, the fancy synagogues. But then he makes the point about the consequence of missing or abandoning these meetings. He says, the nearness of the great crisis of the Lord's coming made the obligation of mutual support among Christians urgently pressing. The danger was great and the time was short. Those who deserted the Christian faith would be swept away in the ruin soon to follow without the opportunity to return. The beginning of the Jewish war was already visible to the Hebrews. So he's making the point that when this epistle was written, there was the very great danger of being swept away with what we used to call the Jewish system of things when we were witnesses, right? Very close at hand. So Ray goes more into the forms of early Christian worship and assembly and ecclesia in the next segment. And we're going to link to Westcott.
Yes.
I've done a video that hasn't got much visibility. Did it way back at the beginning of our channel, actually. Westcott on organization in Hebrews. We all know who Westcott is if we're learned Jehovah's Witnesses. He's the man to whom, along with his colleague Fenton Hort, we owe the Greek text of our New World Translation. Westcott, what does he think of organization in Hebrews? Or better put, the lack of stress upon organization in Hebrews. And next time, more about the forms. How frequently did early Christians meet together?